Secrets buried for 3 decades can explode in a single afternoon. When my son Jake followed me to that coffee shop in Denver and saw me hand a manila envelope to a complete stranger, he thought he'd caught me in an affair that would destroy our family. The DNA report inside that envelope didn't break our family apart. It revealed that everything Jake believed about his identity, his heritage, and his place in the world was built on a lie I'd been protecting since the day he was born. The confrontation happened exactly as I'd feared it would, until Jake made the mistake of demanding to see what was in that envelope before the stranger could leave the parking lot. He grabbed those papers expecting to find evidence of my betrayal. But what he discovered instead made him question every story I'd ever told him about his father, his ancestry, and why we'd moved to Colorado when he was just 2 years old. What Jake found in that DNA analysis would lead him to uncover a family fortune, tragic love story, and the real reason I'd spent 30 years running from the truth. If you've ever wondered how one document can completely rewrite someone's life story, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think that DNA report revealed. This story will show you that some secrets are kept not to hurt people, but to protect them from a truth too dangerous to know. This story will take you through the most complicated web of family secrets you've ever heard. Jake is 32, a hard-working construction foreman in Denver, Colorado, but his fatal flaw is his absolute belief that he knows everything about his family's history. That certainty nearly destroyed his chance at claiming an inheritance worth millions. I'm Sarah, 54, a woman Jake has always seen as his devoted single mother who sacrificed everything to raise him alone after his father died in a car accident. What Jake doesn't know is that every detail of that story is a carefully constructed lie designed to protect him from a truth that could have gotten us both killed. Tom is the stranger Jake saw me meeting at the coffee shop, 58, a private investigator who spent 2 years tracking us down on behalf of a family that's been searching for Jake his entire life. Tom became the key to unlocking secrets that would change Jake's destiny forever. And then there's Robert Wilson, Jake's real father, who isn't dead like I told him. He's one of the wealthiest men in Texas, and he's been looking for his son for 30 years. The Starbucks on South Broadway in Denver was busy that Thursday afternoon in October. I'd chosen this location specifically because it was across town from where Jake worked, far from our neighborhood, somewhere I thought I'd never accidentally run into anyone who knew us. I'd been planning this meeting for weeks, ever since Tom had finally tracked us down after a 2-year search. I was sitting in the corner booth, nervously checking my phone, when Tom walked in. He was exactly what you'd expect a private investigator to look like: average height, gray hair, the kind of face that blended into crowds. He ordered a coffee and sat across from me without saying a word. "Do you have them?" I asked quietly. Tom nodded and pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "The DNA results came back yesterday. It's a 99.7% match." My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. After 30 years of running, hiding, changing our names, and moving across the country, the truth had finally caught up with us. "Sarah, you need to understand what this means," Tom said, leaning forward. "Robert Wilson has been searching for his son since 1994. He's hired private investigators, posted rewards, even hired psychics. He's never stopped looking." "I know. That's why I've spent 30 years making sure he couldn't find us." "But why? The man is worth over $200 million. Jake is his only child. He wants to give him everything." I looked around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening to our conversation. "Tom, you don't understand. Robert Wilson isn't just wealthy, he's dangerous. And there are people in his world who would kill Jake if they knew he existed." That's when I saw him. Through the window, walking across the parking lot, heading straight for the Starbucks entrance. Jake. My heart stopped. After 30 years of careful planning, my son had somehow found me at the exact moment I was meeting with the one person who could destroy the life I'd built to protect him. Jake walked into the Starbucks and scanned the room until his eyes found mine. The expression on his face was pure betrayal mixed with confusion. He'd clearly followed me here, probably thinking I was meeting another man behind his back. "Mom?" he said, loud enough that other customers turned to look. "What are you doing here?" I quickly gestured for him to lower his voice, but the damage was done. Tom had already started to close his briefcase, recognizing that our secret meeting had been compromised. "Jake, sweetheart, this isn't what you think." "Then what is it?" "Because it looks like you're having some kind of secret meeting with a strange man in a coffee shop across town from where we live." Jake sat down at our table without being invited, his eyes moving between me and Tom with suspicion. "Are you having an affair, Mom? Because if you are, just tell me the truth. I'd rather know than keep wondering why you've been acting so weird lately." Tom looked at me with raised eyebrows, clearly asking if he should leave. I shook my head slightly. After 30 years of secrecy, maybe it was time for Jake to learn the truth. "Jake, I want you to meet Tom Bradley. He's a private investigator." "A private investigator? What do you need a private investigator for?" "He's been hired to find us." "Find us? Mom, what are you talking about? Find us for what?" Tom cleared his throat. "Jake, my name is Tom Bradley, and I've been hired by your father to locate you and your mother." Jake stared at Tom like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "My father is dead. He died in a car accident when I was 2 years old." "That's what your mother told you," Tom said gently. "But it's not true." The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet despite the conversations happening around us. Jake's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, anger, disbelief. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I reached across the table and put my hand on Jake's arm. "Sweetheart, there are things about our family history that I've never told you. Things I kept secret to protect you." "What kind of things?" "Your father isn't dead, Jake. His name is Robert Wilson, and he's been looking for you your entire life." Jake pulled his arm away from me and stared at me like I was a stranger. "That's impossible. You showed me pictures of my dad. You told me he died in a car accident in Kansas before we moved to Colorado. Those weren't pictures of your father. Those were pictures of my friend David from high school. I needed you to have some kind of father figure to imagine, so I created a story that would keep you from asking questions." "Keep me from asking questions about what?" Tom pulled the manila envelope out of his briefcase and placed it on the table. "Jake, this contains DNA test results proving that Robert Wilson is your biological father. It also contains financial documents showing that you're entitled to an inheritance of approximately $85 million. Jake looked at the envelope like it might explode. $85 million? "Your father owns oil fields throughout Texas and Oklahoma. He's been setting aside money for you since the day you were born, hoping that someday he'd find you." "But why?" Jake looked at me with hurt in his eyes. "Mom, why would you keep this from me? Why would you tell me my father was dead if he's alive and looking for me?" I took a deep breath. This was the conversation I'd been dreading for 30 years. "Because, Jake, your father isn't just wealthy. He's connected to people who would see you as a threat to their own inheritance. Robert Wilson has a brother named Frank who's been waiting 30 years to inherit Robert's fortune. If Frank finds out about you..." "What?" "What would happen? Frank Wilson has already killed one person to protect his place in the family inheritance. He won't hesitate to kill you too." Before I explain how a family inheritance turned into a deadly game of hide-and-seek that lasted 3 decades, and how the DNA report Jake was holding would put his life in immediate danger, make sure you're subscribed to hear the rest of this incredible story. Comment below if you think Jake should have stayed hidden or if he deserves to know the truth about his father. The next part of this story will show you just how dangerous family money can be. Jake stared at the DNA results, reading them over and over again. "Mom, this says Robert Wilson is definitely my father. It says the probability is 99.7%. "I know, sweetheart. But you told me my father's name was Mike Johnson. You said he was a construction worker from Kansas." Tom pulled out another document from his briefcase. "Jake, your mother's real name isn't Sarah Miller. It's Sarah Patterson. She changed both of your names and moved to Colorado in 1994 when you were 2 years old. My real name isn't Jake Miller. Your real name is Jacob Robert Wilson. You were born in Dallas, Texas on March 15th, 1992. Jake looked at me with complete shock. My birthday isn't even right? You lied about my birthday? I moved your birthday by 2 months to make it harder for anyone to find you through birth records. Mom, why? Why would you go to such extreme lengths to hide from my father if he just wants to know me? I pulled out my phone and showed Jake a newspaper article I'd saved from 1993. The headline read, Oil Harris found dead in apparent accident. Jake, this is Margaret Wilson. She was Robert's first wife, Frank's sister-in-law. She died in a suspicious car accident 3 months before you were born. What does this have to do with us? Margaret had discovered that Frank was embezzling money from the family business. She was planning to expose him to Robert and have him arrested. The night before she was supposed to meet with the police, her car went off a bridge. Jake studied the newspaper article. You think Frank killed her? I know Frank killed her, because Frank told me he did. The coffee shop suddenly felt very cold. Jake and Tom both stared at me. Frank found out I was pregnant with Robert's baby. He came to see me a week after Margaret's funeral. He told me that if I ever contacted Robert or tried to claim any part of the Wilson family fortune, I'd end up like Margaret. He threatened to kill you? He threatened to kill both of us. He said accidents happen to mothers and babies all the time, and nobody would question another tragedy in the Wilson family. Jake set down the DNA report. So you ran. I took you and disappeared. I changed our names, moved across the country, and spent 30 years making sure Frank Wilson could never find us. Tom leaned forward. Sarah, that's exactly why Robert hired me. He knows what Frank did to Margaret, and he suspects Frank is the reason you disappeared. Robert knows about Frank? Robert has suspected Frank for years, but he's never been able to prove anything. Frank is careful, and he's been very successful at covering his tracks. Jake looked between Tom and me. So my real father has been looking for me because he knows his brother is dangerous? Your father has been looking for you because he loves you and wants to protect you from Frank, but also because he needs your help. My help with what? Tom pulled out another document. This is Robert Wilson's will. He's dying, Jake. He has pancreatic cancer, and doctors say he has maybe 6 months left. The air went out of my lungs. After 30 years of keeping Jake away from his father, Robert was dying. If Robert dies without officially acknowledging you as his son and heir, everything goes to Frank by default. That means Frank gets away with murder and inherits $200 million. But if Jake comes forward now, I said slowly, Frank will try to kill him before Robert can change his will. That's exactly right, which is why Robert has a plan. Jake looked exhausted by all the information. What kind of plan? Robert wants to meet you in secret. He wants to officially recognize you as his son and heir through legal documents that can't be contested. But he also wants to gather enough evidence to have Frank arrested for Margaret's murder before Frank knows you exist. How would we do that? Tom smiled. Robert has been recording Frank's conversations for months. Frank has gotten careless in his old age, and he's said enough to incriminate himself. But Robert needs you to be present when Frank finally confesses. You want me to help trap a murderer who's been trying to kill me my entire life? We want you to help bring justice to Margaret Wilson and claim your rightful inheritance, but only if you're willing to take the risk. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at the DNA report and the newspaper article about Margaret Wilson's death. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. Did you love my father? I mean my real father, Robert? I felt tears forming in my eyes. This was the hardest question of all. I loved Robert more than I've ever loved anyone in my life. Leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever done. Then why didn't you trust him to protect us? Because Frank convinced me that Robert was in on it. Frank told me that Robert knew about Margaret's murder and that he'd approved it because she was causing problems for the family business. Tom shook his head. Sarah, Robert has been devastated for 30 years. He thought you left because you didn't love him. He never knew Frank had threatened you. Robert thought I abandoned him? Robert thought you took his son and disappeared because you decided you didn't want to be part of the Wilson family. I started crying right there in the Starbucks. 30 years of running, hiding, and lying had been based on Frank's manipulation. I'd kept Jake from his father because I'd believed a murderer's lies about the man I loved. Mom, we have to fix this, Jake said, reaching across the table to take my hand. We have to tell Robert the truth about what Frank did. Jake, it's dangerous. If Frank finds out you exist. Mom, my real father is dying. He spent 30 years thinking the woman he loved abandoned him and took his child away. I can't let him die believing that. Tom nodded. Jake, Robert is prepared to do everything possible to keep you safe. He's hired security. He's working with the FBI to build a case against Frank, and he's ready to change his will immediately to make sure you inherit everything, even if something happens to him. What do we need to do? First, we need to get you to Dallas to meet your father. Second, we need to help him gather the evidence to put Frank in prison. And third, we need to do it all before Frank realizes what's happening. Jake looked at me. Mom, I know you've spent 30 years protecting me, but now it's time for me to help protect Dad. 3 days later, Jake and I were sitting in a private jet flying from Denver to Dallas. Tom had arranged everything through Robert's security team, making sure our travel couldn't be traced by anyone who might be watching. As we flew over the Texas landscape, Jake kept staring at a photograph Tom had given him, a picture of Robert Wilson holding a baby. That baby is you, I told him. That picture was taken 2 weeks before I left Dallas. Look how happy he looks, Jake said quietly. Your father adored you. He used to spend hours just watching you sleep. He said you were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Mom, why didn't you contact him when Frank died? You could have told him the truth then. Frank isn't dead, sweetheart. He's still alive, still dangerous, and still waiting to inherit Robert's fortune. When we landed at a private airfield outside Dallas, there was a black SUV waiting for us. But the man who got out of the driver's seat wasn't security, it was Robert Wilson himself. Even though 30 years had passed, I recognized him immediately. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile, though his hair was completely gray now and his face showed the effects of his illness. Jake got out of the car first, and Robert just stared at him for a long moment. You look exactly like your mother did when she was your age, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. And I have your hands, Jake replied, holding up his hands to compare them to Robert's. They embraced right there on the tarmac, and I watched 30 years of separation melt away in a single moment. That evening, we sat in Robert's study in his mansion outside Dallas. The walls were covered with photographs, pictures of me and Jake from when Jake was a baby, pictures Robert had taken during the 2 years we'd been together. Robert, I need to explain why I left. I began. Sarah, Tom told me everything. Frank threatened you and the baby. You were protecting our son. But I should have trusted you. I should have told you what Frank said instead of just disappearing. Robert took my hand. You were 24 years old, pregnant and scared. Frank is a master manipulator. I don't blame you for believing him. Jake looked around the study, taking in 30 years of his father's life. Dad, Tom said you never got married again. I couldn't. The only woman I've ever loved is your mother. But you thought she'd abandoned you. I hoped that someday I'd understand why she left. I never stopped believing that there was a good reason. I started crying again. Robert, I've wasted 30 years of our lives because I was afraid. Sarah, you saved our son's life. Frank would have killed him if you'd stayed. You did exactly the right thing. But now what do we do? Frank is still dangerous. Robert smiled and pulled out a small recording device. Frank is about to get a very big surprise. The next morning, Robert called a family meeting at the Wilson Oil Company headquarters. He told Frank he had important news about the company's future and his will. What Frank didn't know was that the FBI was recording everything through hidden microphones Robert had been wearing for weeks. "Frank, I've decided to change my will," Robert announced as they sat in the boardroom. "Oh, what kind of changes?" "I'm leaving everything to my son," Frank laughed. "Robert, you don't have a son. Sarah ran off with that baby 30 years ago. He could be anywhere. Actually, Frank, he's right here." That's when Jake walked into the boardroom. Frank's face went white. "That's impossible." "Frank Wilson," said Agent Johnson, stepping out from behind a wall panel. "You're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Wilson and conspiracy to commit murder." "I don't know what you're talking about." Agent Johnson pressed play on a recording device. Frank's voice filled the room. "I told that little girl the same thing I told Margaret accidents happen to, people who threaten this family's business. Sarah was smart enough to run. Margaret wasn't." The recording had been made just 2 days earlier when Robert had confronted Frank about threats made against family members. "Frank Wilson, you have the right to remain silent." 6 months later, Frank was serving a life sentence for Margaret's murder. Robert's cancer had responded well to treatment, giving him several more years to spend with Jake and me. But the most important transformation was in our family relationships. "Sarah, I need to ask you something," Robert said one evening as we watched Jake playing with his daughter, the granddaughter Robert had never expected to meet. "What is it? Will you marry me? We've lost 30 years, but we don't have to lose another day." "Robert, are you sure? So much has changed." "Nothing important has changed. I love you, you love me, and we have a son who needs both his parents." Jake looked up from playing with little Emma. "Mom, if you don't marry Dad, I'm going to be very disappointed." "Why is that?" "Because I've spent my whole life thinking I was just Jake Miller, a construction worker from Denver. Now I find out I'm Jacob Wilson, heir to an oil fortune, with parents who love each other and a family legacy to carry on. I want my daughter to grow up knowing her real family. Today, 3 years later, our family has completely transformed. Robert's health is stable, Frank is in prison, and Wilson Oil Company is thriving under Jake's management. But the biggest change is that we're finally living as the family we were always meant to be." "Mom, do you ever regret running away?" Jake asked during our weekly family dinner. "I regret the 30 years we lost together, but I don't regret protecting you from Frank." "What do you think would have happened if you'd stayed?" Robert answered for me. "Frank would have killed both of you. Your mother saved your life by having the courage to disappear. But now we're safe. Now Frank is in prison for life, and our family can finally be together without fear." Jake raised his glass. "To Mom, for 30 years of sacrifice. To Dad, for never giving up hope. And to the DNA report that brought us all back together. The Wilson family story has had effects far beyond our personal lives. Robert has established a foundation to help other families dealing with inheritance-related threats and domestic violence. There are other families out there living in fear of dangerous relatives," Robert told a reporter last month. "The Wilson Family Protection Foundation provides legal help, security resources, and safe relocation services for families who need to disappear to stay alive. The foundation has helped over 200 families in its first 2 years. Every family deserves to live without fear," Jake told the same reporter. "My mom spent 30 years protecting me from a murderer. Now we want to help other parents who are facing similar threats." The day Jake caught me meeting a stranger in that coffee shop, he thought he was about to discover his mother's betrayal. Instead, he discovered a DNA report that revealed 30 years of sacrifice, love, and protection that had kept him safe from a family fortune that came with a deadly price. When Jake grabbed that manila envelope from Tom's hands, he wasn't just learning about his real father, he was uncovering a love story that had survived 3 decades of separation and a family legacy worth fighting for. The most powerful lesson our family learned wasn't about DNA or inheritance or even justice. It was about the difference between running away from danger and running toward safety. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making decisions that look like abandonment but are actually the deepest form of love. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with anyone who's ever had to make difficult choices to protect their family. Comment below and tell me, would you have done what I did to protect your child? Your stories help other families know they're not alone in making impossible choices. Whether you're dealing with family secrets, dangerous relatives, or just trying to protect the people you love, remember that love finds a way to survive even the longest separations. And sometimes the truth that seems most destructive is actually the key to freedom. Because the stranger you're meeting in secret might not be the end of your family's story. He might be the beginning of the happy ending you never thought possible.